Welcome to our first episode of Navigating Cyber Risk. Today we have a special episode, and we're going to stray away from our normal format to talk about the cyber risk. The news has been covering it mainly from a consumer perspective, and we want to understand what the executives are going through, maybe have some technical discussions, but really what could have prevented this or how they're feeling, maybe some regulations, and what the fallout of this is going to be. So with that, we'll start off with talking about the breaches themselves. And if you're not aware, Caesars was breached some ransomware. Actually, I was told that I actually have to date this episode. So today's September 21st. It's about noon PST. So this is going to be information that we know as of today. So end of August, Caesars was breached. It looks like they paid some sort of ransomware or ransom to the company that breached them. They're currently coming back online. Not too long after that, sometime during September, MGM was also breached, the MGM Entertainment Group. So a number of hotels and casinos affecting operations. With that being the case, so we'll go ahead and start. This is Navigating Cyber Risk podcast with me, John Riley and George Usi as your hosts. Join us as we explore the challenges faced by executives as they grapple with new and ever-changing cybersecurity mandates. George, what do you think the executives might be feeling right about now?
Well, I think from casino operations perspective, I think any type of incident, the very first thing that you do is you're going to go through an exercise of, at an executive level, of the impact as well as crisis response. But you're making decisions generally, and these decisions should have already been made to that respect. So that's kind of in the past. So where they are probably today is they are probably going through what we refer to as containment or return to operation. My guess is that they're probably in containment. So basically, when you have a cyber incident, an executive, and because this doesn't happen all the time to executives, understanding what the process looks like from a simple language perspective is you have what essentially is the shock moment of, and the very first thing that's generally done is the executive teams get together and try to understand the impact. And of course, the impact in this case has been catastrophic. So the choice that they have to make is to unplug. I mean, that's almost always the first step. Okay, unplug everything. We've got a pretty serious issue. Or you're in such a situation where the hackers unplugged you and so you were down already. But generally speaking, that's where they probably had to go through that exercise first. From there, you're either making an immediate call to your attorney, which is generally what happens, or group of attorneys, as well as you're reaching out to some of your insurances. And we're already assuming at this point, so if you're the executive, your IT team is probably, kind of went through those steps of probably first started with something's not quite right. And then it progressed and got worse and worse. And then it was a serious problem and you're unplugging. So from there, really, it is about containing the issue and eradicating the hacker, right? So you got to contain it. It's like firefighting, folks, right? Except for it's a digital fire, right? And hackers are really arsonists, right? They start these little digital fires and essentially they say, hey, you pay up or we're going to light the match and it's going to be a big fire. We're going to burn your house down. And so from an executive perspective, you have to make decisions. And I think, as John had mentioned, in some cases you pay, and or at least allegedly it gets reported that you paid. Now, we don't really know what happened. We are not in any way, shape, or form involved in this incident. I want to be clear that this is from the perspective of us understanding what these executives are probably going through. But the most important thing is understanding what is the availability and impact to the operation, and this eradication and containment that you're going through from a tech perspective is really a ground war. Right. And so you're trying to fight these guys out. Once you've gotten to a point where you think things are contained, you have to understand your position of, hey, have I lost data? Can I return to operation? And these can happen in a number of different orders and ways. But since we don't know what is going on in this situation, we're not going to take liberty to guess. But most of the time, it's a pretty standard process of unplug, contain, eradicate, and recover, just very generically. So.
But from the news reports that I saw, it was somewhat interesting. And It started, I'm not sure exactly where it started, but it was actually affecting hotel operations. It was affecting slot machines. It was affecting the loyalty programs. I mean, it was the main websites, reservation systems. I mean, so this one definitely spread throughout. And my understanding of it is that they were losing about $3 million a day profit, not just revenue, but $3 million a day of revenue. Sorry, profit, and not revenue. Obviously, I think it was 10 days or so that they were still they're still recovering. I think that's the bigger report that's going to show up, and very much like Clorox, where they were breached a while ago, but I mean, even in today's SEC filings, they're talking about how they're still returning to operations. Here's September 21st, and we're still saying September 25th. They're still bringing on they're still coming back online. So I think a lot of executives are hiding the fact that, not necessarily hiding the fact, but they still don't believe that something's going to happen. I think where I see it right now is that whether you're a large company or a small company, it only takes a little bit here, and you're down. And if you're a smaller company, you can't recover from this, or you may not be able to recover from this. Having the procedures, the policies, the controls in place is becoming even more important, whether you're a small company or a large company. And the financial risks are just too high these days with the digital arsonists, as you put it.
Yes, and I think that's part of the challenge is that a lot of these attacks are not a surprise. I mean, companies get attacked all the time. The question is whether or not they succeed. And generally, if you're preparing for this cybersecurity ground war, as we call it, which we've been fighting for more than 50 years, by the way, and seem to be losing. And I think a lot of kind of the natural gut reaction is, well, they didn't do this right, they didn't do that technically, right? Or this leader wasn't running things correctly internally, if those kind of discussions are happening. But that's really not where this organization is at right now. Maybe there's some water cooler talk happening about that, but they're still trying to return to operation, unless I've been misinformed as of today, September 21st. And so I would argue that right now it's basically war room, right? So they're trying to get everybody wherever they are in the process. They're trying to make sure that they can, reasonably return to operation. And when you're returning to operation, that's when you know that there's the incident or the situation is contained. It's just like firefighting. We've seen it on the news year over year in the real world, right? So the internet is just a digital delivered world, and we're basically businesses experience what essentially are digital fires. And so you look to that industry to help you understand what might be happening here. So the difference here is you're not necessarily evacuating people, you're evacuating ones and zeros. So moving things that might be at risk, if you still have access to them, locking them out, and making sure that they can't catch fire as well. So I imagine they're well past that state, because generally when you're going public that on an incident, first off, you have regulations. And so from an executive perspective, any executive should be aware of the fact that, hey, what are my regulatory impacts? And unfortunately, there's a lot of new cyber laws out there. In the casinos case, one of the things that was noticeable is a new mandate that happened. Actually, it was unanimous approval by the Gaming Commission, specifically as it relates to protecting customers, employees against cyber attacks. And that mandate went into place on January 1st of this year. So interestingly enough, it took effect January 1, and that's a function of the specifically to the state of Nevada, which is the Association of Gaming Equipment Manufacturers, and the Nevada state. Let's call it the Gaming Board legislation or Gaming Commission legislation, I guess you would call it. And so in those cases, you might argue that this is something that the attorneys are already talking about, which in most cases, when you have an incident, you're activating some attorney, whether it's, and there's always in-house counsel, larger organizations, there will be, and there's a good chance there's outside helpers as well, like 100% of the time. And obviously organizations with insurances, the insurance companies are going to bring people that are on panel. In MGM's case, I can't tell you exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, or what their situation may be. But from the perspective of the executive team, these are probably discussions they've been having for some time. And I think one of the things they may be talking about is whether they're in the crosshairs or the crossfire of this new regulation. And as I understand it, at least in the state of Nevada, they're probably in the crossfire because there's some, generally these things pass and you have time to do things. And so the thing that's on the top of their list is obviously reputation management and crisis risk management, returning to operation. These are all parts of what essentially you would do with a real disaster, except for it's just a digital one. So that's how I would probably perceive the current state of their leadership. Is they're trying to give their teams, as well as their outside helpers, as much room as possible to return to operations, all hands on deck sort of a situation.
Well, and in some cases, I mean, with Caesars being hacked first and then MGM afterwards, I mean, both of those are just giant organizations that are part of that game, that are subject to that gaming board. I know that you had mentioned that some of those things came into effect on January 1st of 2023, and I think that was specifically in regards to giving them 1 year to clean house and put the controls in place so that things like this didn't happen. If this had happened sometime in 2024, January of 2024, I think that would have been much more difficult, or they'd be at a higher risk of even possibly losing their gaming license or having a restricted gaming license instead. I think, is that?
Well, there would definitely be penalties or sanctions of some sort. And I didn't really dig deep into what this gaming commission regulation may look like in terms of penalties. And, even though we do have experience working in the gaming area, at least in terms of the experiences that they may be going through specifically within the state of Nevada are more impactful than just the gaming commission. There's also new state privacy laws, so rewards programs and loyalty programs where, if they get caught breaking those laws, and which if they have, they certainly will that certainly will come to light. But, there's a state bill, I believe it's SB 220. I may have the number wrong just off the top of my head, off of memory, which is the state of Nevada opt-out requirement. So if they're in the rewards program, they weren't properly allowing opt-out. Now they've had an incident, there's going to be risk there. So essentially that's probably what leadership is, doing as they kind of transition. And they may be at a point where they're starting to return to operations. We're not on the ground in Vegas. We're in a different state. But I imagine that one of the biggest challenges that they're facing right now is how do they return to operation and what essentially are those areas where they haven't been able to properly recover. So ultimately, though, the reality that they're going to face immediately is making sure that they properly eradicated the threat. Right? So it's possible to start recovering and then find out that you didn't get everything. And when you have such a massive network, and if it really they've really gotten into different enclaves then, of the networks, which are the things that connect all these systems and departments together, then it's a bigger problem. But what executives should be doing in every industry and or business is going to different, because you have certain things that you have to grapple with. So it's not just the incident and getting things back and running, but you have a certain degree of responsibility to the consumer. And there are regulatory and statutory requirements, as well as notification expectations in these situations. So there's going to be some, as the dust settles, right? There's going to be a lot of different kinds of notices going out to consumers that have ever been who's had their information impacted or absconded with, as we would say. And interestingly enough, they're going to get notifications, and that is just par for the course. So
yeah, I mean, getting any type of those loyalty cards there at the casinos is always just giving your driver's license with home address and, expiration of birthday and all the other wonderful things that are captured there. So that'll definitely be rough for them.
yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
Right.
I think for me, go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
So I think for me, what catches my, maybe I'm just more emotional, but what really gets me is coming in that first day when that's happening, that roller coaster that starts. I mean that it's like that first drop, and that first drop, just that pit in your stomach. Oh my God, how do I get through this? What's going to happen? I think no matter what kind of an executive you are, and you find out that this is going on, it's just I would say it's emotionally devastating. Understanding that you are now you're a victim, and so now you got to deal with it. There's nothing really you can do. Obviously you could try and pay ransom, but you're not guaranteed anything. It's very much a street fight at that point. So
Yeah.
having been through this with a number of customers, there's some empathy that goes along with that. But You know, why don't you talk about that a little bit as far as, you know, the emotions that they may be that you've seen when you've been working with, you know, some of our current customers and some of, you know, some of those understanding what those emotional pieces are that they're going through.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, generally there's really kind of two different mindsets. So your technical team, you know, you're basically, you don't have time to be emotional. You just got to get on it. And so what it really happens is a lot of them will adopt the mindset of let's get it done. Right. We have something that we have to stop. At first, the emotions may be, oh my gosh, my job, what did I do wrong? But you very quickly realize that, hey, we've got a problem to solve and it's all hands on deck. So at first, the emotional side for the executive, though, which is a little bit different, is I don't know what I'm doing. What do I do? Right. Especially at the very high level. So even into the boardroom. But you have to also understand that, you know, these casinos aren't exactly new to security in general, but generally physical security is something that they've been doing for years. Obviously, they have a considerable amount of interest in protecting their casino operations. And there are regulations there for them as well that they have to follow. But when it comes to cyber related incidents and understanding when a hacker jumps in and gets access, and in this case, this was, I guess the best way to describe it is a consortium of channel of hackers. I think that they're identifying it as the scattered spider group. But, you know, ultimately, the reality is that the pursuers, the criminals, are like different gangs, right? So they're going to do things in a certain way. And so some of those things are predictable. I know that in this case, that there seems to be reports about how this attack has been originated out of a hacker service, so to speak, or a ransomware as a service operation. But let's not make any assumptions, folks. And we're all trying. Who does it really matter as an executive? The emotion is, I don't care. How do I get back to revenue? That's the emotion. How, like that fear of I'm not producing the revenue, but I am incurring costs. The substantial risk that you're going to have to deal with afterwards when you're in that war room situation with your technical people, right, is a different emotion. So that'll come later. There are stages of emotions that will occur. And many of our customers, the first thing that what most companies receive is we call it the CEO call. So where perhaps it was some executive that we've, you know, educated on these topics in cyber risk and some of these new cascading cyber laws, or we call them statutory and regulatory requirements, and, you know, where they were in terms of understanding their position in their industry. Some industries are more mature, but I think when you look at a casino getting hit, you would think, at least from practical perspectives, that the way that hackers do their work, that they shouldn't be able to break into a casino that has so much experience in security. I think that's the other piece that you have to consider is your consumer's emotion, right? Because now you have all these consumers that are patronizing your business. They're used to coming and seeing you, and now they're scratching their heads going, oh. And so the emotion that the executive is feeling is, how do I earn their trust back? Like, this is that time, but we got to get back to operation. And I think that's the biggest emotion that an executive starts to feel. That first call is, the house is on fire. Help, get your cyber fire department going, right? And so, sometimes that cyber fire is so out of control that it takes a long time to contain. So I'll reference another incident that happened a while ago, which was Clorox. So Clorox had an incident, and so looking at their journey and where they are today, now there are reports of an incident that happened months ago. There are reports now saying how now they're being impacted in production. So I would imagine that a situation that Clorox went through that was months ago, and now there's reports of how it's impacting them, is the emphasis behind what an executive emotion may be is like, oh my gosh, I'm having issues within, this is going to impact me long term. What's my long term impact? And that's where the emotions tend to once the dust settles in containment and eradication, then those kinds of emotions set in is, how do I restore faith? How do I make sure that I'm not having issues further down the road? And then the regulatory side is going to also fall into play. So the pursuits, the lawsuits, and those sorts of things. And this is where demonstrating that you were doing the right thing, especially when nobody was watching before the hack, becomes really important. Whether or not MDM did that or Clorox did that, I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see how that does fall out, and whether they had good tracking of that from a GRC and a executive standpoint. I understand, do they have all those check boxes done, and were they ready? No, I was going to say, is there anything else that you think our audience should know about this? And
I do think just one other thing, which is this should be a lesson to consumers that compromise is a matter of when, right? So you have to be diligent within your own right as an individual, that even an organization that you would imagine is going to, be able to stop hackers, that they're so incredibly sophisticated today that, things are a little bit more complicated for some of these organizations. And believe me, there will be a lot of I'm sure a lot of reactions about, they didn't do A, B, or C, or D right. And those reactions used to be blame it on the technical teams. Well, they didn't do this or that right. They didn't program something correctly. They didn't configure something correctly. And that's the interesting thing, is that although that may be true, what's happening is this lesson to the executives, outside the consumers, it's buyer beware. But on the executive side, it is more of you better be able to demonstrate that you were doing the right thing before the breach, even if you had a breach, if it's going to happen no matter what. And so really, you have to take a close look at your risk management teams, right? How well are you handling cyber risk specifically? And unfortunately, a lot of these, as John used the term GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance, a term that's been around longer than cybersecurity, that's for sure. But that was almost always an area of risk of somebody falling in the workplace in a factory, or risk of a bank teller doing something incorrectly, or certain kinds of things that may not have transferred into the digital world. Now we have all these cyber risks, and it's really not an easy thing to deal with for any company, mainly because there's millions of jobs that are unfilled right now because we don't have enough people. So it almost feels untenable. So the lesson here for the executive team is it's wise to start to prove and demonstrate what you're doing, whether it is mature or immature. You're going to have to build your, let's call it your burden of proof pile. So that would be the lesson for them, because these incidents will probably be a lot easier to deal with if you've also done exercises and you've done planning and you went through these kinds of scenarios. None of them are simple, but when I say easier, it's still hard. But how do you make it less difficult? And that is the challenge, that executives are responsible to make sure the resources are given to these teams, because cyber laws are coming and they're going to roll over you. And essentially, they're holding executives accountable.
And ultimately, my analogy for that is you don't want to be on the Pee-wee team trying to figure out how to play when, you really need to be like an NFL team or something like that, professional, practiced, ready to go when something like that happens. So, all right. Well, I think overall that pretty much covers most of how everybody's feeling, the executives, and how they're going to return to operations. So I think that's I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening in on this one. We appreciate your time, and hope you enjoyed this format on this particular one. Let us know. And this has been a good first episode, I think, for our Navigating Cyber Risk with your hosts here, John and George. Anything to add there, George?
Yeah, thanks everybody. And we'll probably see you at maybe a business conferences or otherwise. Again, John Riley and I'm George Usi. We look forward to having you visit us again on one of our future podcasts.
Thank you, everybody. This was another amazing episode of Navigating Cyber Risk, powered by OmniStruct. Show us some love by subscribing and sharing today. Reach out to us with any comments, questions, or ideas about future shows by emailing us at podcast@omnistruct.com. Until next time, remember, governance is not a technology.